speaking, is not good for Israel, and it's not good for Gazans. It's not good because it prolongs the problem. Hamas will still remain in power over the Gaza Strip, and we won't see strategic change. As long as Hamas is there, we can all rest assured that there will be continued misery, suffering, fighting, and war in Gaza between Hamas-led Gaza and Israel. The only good thing that may come of this, and I'm really, really hopeful that it happens, is that we will see the return home of hopefully as many as possible of the 96 remaining Israeli hostages that have languished in Hamas captivity for 470 days. Taken on the 7th of October brutally by Hamas and kept in Hamas captivity since. We fear that we're only talking about 35, perhaps less than that are alive. And the positive thing that may come of this is that they are returned home and that there's a short respite in fighting. To be very realistic here, you asked in the intro if the world is going to be a safer place. I don't think so, as long as Hamas is in power. And will we see peace in the Middle East? I doubt it. As long as Hamas still is allowed to continue to govern the Gaza Strip, then I don't see really a way forward, and I would love to be corrected in the future. And bottom line, in my mind, the way I see it, this is a milestone, an important one, and I yearn to see Israeli hostages embraced by their families finally after such a long and cruel and barbaric captivity. But beyond that, I don't think that there are many positive things happening strategically. Not a good deal for Israel, for Israelis, and actually not for Gazans as well, because it'll keep them in this limbo situation of Hamas still there, not ousted, but nobody really taking care of starting to rebuild Gaza or to provide any type of functioning governance.
OK. Lot to unpack there. Miriam Francois, your response.
Well, first of all, we don't take any of our cues on anything to do with ethics, morality, or assessment of the Middle East from a spokesperson for a genocidal government. So let's be absolutely clear that Jonathan is here 16 months into a genocide to provide cover for that ongoing genocide. And the only platform this man deserves is one at The Hague, which eventually is where he will end up with the rest of the government that he currently represents. Let's not forget that there are already 2 arrest warrants in place for him and Yoel Gallant, him being Netanyahu, that this man here represents, the spokesperson of that very government.
Well, he's not the spokesman for that government.
He's a spokesman for the IDF, which is what?
He's not. He's an independent citizen now.
Oh, so. for Piers.
Well, he's not.
Spare me. OK.
Sorry, you said he's the spokesman for the IDF. He's not.
OK, Piers. Of course he's not. He's just here as a friendly former member of the IDF.
You called him the spokesman for the IDF. He's not.
He literally is. But
he literally is not.
OK, Piers.
Well, that's an actual job. Mm-hmm. So I don't mean to be... just to be factual, he's not the spokesman for the IDF. Okay. He's here in an independent capacity.
He's not in an independent capacity, but sure thing. Now, moving on to the terms of the deal, this man is not a reference for any analysis on that. I think the most important question is what is going to happen to the civilians who are caught up in this conflict. That is the only real question at stake here, whether they are Palestinians or Israelis. And after 16 months of conflict, there must be a resolution. Now, we know that Netanyahu has systematically catapulted any attempts to bring about a peace agreement. And it appears from what our spokesperson has been saying, that is unfortunately where the current proposed deal is likely to head. But to me, I don't think you could even...
Are you a spokesperson for Hamas, just out of interest?
Oh, spare me, Piers.
Are you?
Spare me.
Well, by the same yardstick, if you're going to say that Jonathan Conricus has a formal job on this panel as a spokesman for IDF,
yes.
I'm just asking you then, if you're here to take the other side, are you therefore de facto a spokesperson for Hamas?
Babes, spare me.
I'm not your babe.
OK, well, and if
I'm just asking you, if you're going to give people labels, they should be accurate.
Yes,
otherwise, viewers may get a misleading view about what is happening.
So, anyways...
Can I jump in, Piers, just to clarify?
Please do, Ahmed.
You can,
all I'd like to say is he was a spokesperson for the IDF.
Yes,
that's
indeed,
accurate.
And
that's accurate, but he's not. But Ahmed, you would agree he's not the current spokesman for the IDF, and these things actually matter. Because the current spokesman for the IDF, I can tell you, would not be saying what Jonathan's saying. That's why I know he's speaking as an independent voice, because he's been very critical of a deal that the IDF spokesman would not be critical of. So these things are important.
Sure. Facts and truths are important.
Yes.
And I think anybody who's served as a former spokesman for the IDF is certainly not considered impartial or independent. But if I may, I want to share with all of us.
I never claimed to be partial or independent.
Exactly.
To be honest.
So let's not get derailed.
It's just better to use accurate. It's better to be using accurate terminology about whether people have official roles or they don't. And just to be clear, Jonathan Comric is no longer any form of official spokesman for IDF. He's here as an independent person, albeit, as he says, not with non-partisan views. He's openly clear about that, but he's not an official spokesman. I think that matters for viewers who are watching, who may be confused as to whether, because of what Miriam said, he is. He's not.
No, Piers, I agree with you. Facts matter, and I want to start by addressing an uncomfortable truth. Any ceasefire deal, since we're talking about a ceasefire, that leaves the illegal blockade and occupation of Palestine intact is going to be, by definition, temporary. You can describe it as a Band-Aid on a wound that requires surgery without addressing the root causes of the violence, the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, the illegal occupation of Palestinian land. This cycle will continue. And I think we're here to talk about a ceasefire and whether that will lead to peace, as Jonathan talked about, because we've all seen the harrowing images coming out of Gaza. Piers, I know you've seen them because you share them on your social media.
They're horrific.
They're heartbreaking. Yes. They're relentless. And frankly, they're a moral test for all of us, including Jonathan. How can we, as human beings, witness what we've witnessed and not only be overwhelmed by helplessness, but not confront the mechanisms that enable this impunity? That's where we have to start. And the ceasefire...
Well, actually, okay, let me stop you there, because I think this is important to clarify where I come from on this, okay? Which is, I don't have a side, despite what both sides keep telling me, because both sides think I'm in the camp for the other side. I've always tried to be fair. But you see, it's interesting when I hear you, because you basically start in your thinking, in the way you're speaking publicly, from Israel's response onwards. And I prefer to start from this whole thing in totality, going back to October the 7th, and the heinous attack on Israel.
It's totality October
I'm not
the 7th.
Talking to you. No,
yeah, but I am talking.
Well, I'm talking
and I'm
to
letting
Ahmed.
you know that it didn't start on October the 7th.
No, there's obviously...
And if you want to take it in your totality...
No, I'm talking to Ahmed, if you don't mind. To show some respect for your fellow panellists,
no,
please.
I do mind. If you want to start from the beginning, let's start from 1948.
Yes, I'm about to say that. If you let me just finish what I'm saying.
Welcome.
Obviously, I know there is 75 years of history to this conflict. Obviously, I'm aware passions on both sides run very high. Obviously, I'm aware, Ahmed, from everyone I've talked to on both sides, and I would say my show has platformed more people, by the way, from the Palestinian side than any other show in the world. So when people on the Palestinian side say to me, you're so biased, I say, really? Because I could rattle off a lot of names of people who've not been allowed a space anywhere else, right? And Jonathan, I know you know that because you've been up against them, right? So my point is this.
Because I've seen the amount of vile anti-Semitism that has been platformed here, the amount of lies and utter nonsense, including by the two previous speakers, accusing Israel of genocide and things that are fantastic and completely false.
Okay, don't talk over each other. Okay, listen. Let me go back to Ahmed. I'm talking to Ahmed. Let me just talk to Ahmed. Here's my point. Let me finish my point. Ahmed, let me finish my point. Don't all talk over each other. Let me finish. Let's try and keep some order here. We get a better debate for the viewers. So my point is, I go back to October the 7th for the purposes of this particular war, this particular phase of the whole conflict, okay? And so when I hear people who only start about their horror about Israel's response, I say, well, hang on a second. You actually need to start with the utter horror of October the 7th, which precipitated this extraordinary response from Israel, which in my opinion, for the record, I think has now gone way too far. And I've always asked during this, what is proportionate? I do not believe what has been happening in the last few months is proportionate. And I think that's why this has to end. So my point, though, Ahmed, is that I don't think you can talk about Israel's response in isolation and not record the fact that on October the 7th, 7,000 people were wounded or killed and over 250 were kidnapped. So I just want to put it in totality because I think as we reach a point of potential ceasefire or some kind of agreement, it's the only way to be fair about this.
Sure. But because we want to be fair, I think it would be an insult to our collective intelligence and to our collective humanity to suggest that nothing before October 7th can justify October 7th. But October 7th itself can somehow justify the horrific violation of moral and legal norms.
Well,
day after day.
I agree.
And
Listen,
also,
with the premise of what you've just
can I
said.
finish my thought?
Yeah, but I'm just saying I agree with you about that point, right? So I agree that nothing that happened on October the 7th to me now justifies the scale of what has happened now since, right?
Fair enough.
I agree with you.
And Piers, the point that I need to make, and that I was going on to make, so I appreciate you interjecting, but please just let me get to the point.
Sure.
Because what's disturbing to me, Piers, is, as you know, Palestinian suffering did not start on October 7th. It did not start last year. As you mentioned, it's been decades of ethnic cleansing. And, you know, Jonathan called me a liar, even though I've barely spoken on this program. I don't think I've shared any lies. But one thing I want to say about Palestinian suffering is, even in the context of an unfolding genocide, the scale of which you described, the conversation is immediately derailed. It's redirected to condemnations of Hamas or abuses in other nations, as if one injustice nullifies another. Francesca Albanese on your show made it clear that one war crime, according to international law, does not justify another. And yet, here we are watching Israel commit war crime after war crime every single day. And let's just be clear. When it comes to the ceasefire, to bring it back to the point of this show, the delay in the deal wasn't about negotiations or Hamas, as the media has repeatedly claimed. It was about putting profit over people, appeasing Israel's far-right government. And even now, as the deal is edging closer, we still hear from extremists in the Israeli government, like Smotrich, calling it a catastrophe and openly advocating for the continued not only occupation of Palestinian people and land, but for cleansing. That's his word, Gaza. That is, if you look at, Piers, the objectives that Netanyahu stated, we see now U.S. intelligence reports that Hamas has recruited at least as many new fighters as Israel.
I find that very disturbing. I agree.
Yeah, and this is because this is not a war in the traditional sense. Gaza has been reduced to a death camp. Now, that might sound like hyperbole to Jonathan or anyone else, but the reality is being documented, and the evidence is all over the platform X, and it's all over alternative and independent media. And so the stark reality is that we are witnessing a chilling reminder that history repeats itself. Despite the carnage, Israel's strategy seems to be fueling resistance, not extinguishing it. They're not eradicating Hamas. Israeli security officials themselves, and Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong or lying, they admit that Hamas fighters have only been reduced from 25,000 to 19,000. I'm citing U.S. intelligence as well, which reminds us what we already know, which is, let me just finish. You said you weren't going to interrupt. Yeah. Jonathan, at the beginning, you said you weren't going to interrupt. I'm almost done.
No, you invited me to correct you, so I'm happy to do
faster than it can be crushed. You can correct me when I'm done. So what has Israel gained? I'll ask you, Jonathan.
Well, you've been speaking for like 20 minutes.
Hamas hasn't been defeated. In fact, it has.
Okay. Well, to be fair to Jonathan, I mean, you can't keep asking him questions, and when he tries to reply, you say you haven't finished. So.
What has Israel accomplished? My question to Jonathan Pierce. I appreciate that. Netanyahu's real objective has not been accomplished. His stated objective has not been accomplished. And you and I both know, Pierce, and Jonathan does as well, as does everybody on this panel, and I'd love to hear from the remaining guest after Jonathan, that the Biden administration knew the terms of this deal back when they proposed it. A deal that Biden allowed Netanyahu to torch while fueling Israel's genocide.
All right, all right, listen, I'm going to bring... Okay, listen, I'm going to let Jonathan respond to you because you asked direct questions. Batty, if you just hold fire, we'll come to you, I promise you. We've got Dan Crenshaw waiting as well. I'm going to go to him and then I'm going to get Batty to respond. Yeah, I'll get you to respond, Batty, to what Dan Crenshaw says in a moment. But Jonathan, first of all, your response to what Ahmed said there about this apparent reality which the Americans are putting out there, which is that Hamas, far from being defeated, actually almost every Hamas terrorist who's been killed has now been replaced. I mean, what is your response to that?
Yeah, so there were a few things that I actually could agree with the previous speaker, with Ahmed, in the fact that Hamas has not yet been defeated. And I said so, I admitted so myself, and I think that's why Israel has not yet achieved its strategic goals. It has not yet safeguarded southern Israel, and Gaza will continue to be in misery because Hamas still governs. Now, a very important detail that was omitted, I suppose not by mistake, is how is Hamas recruiting and what enables them to recruit. They're recruiting 15, 16, 17, and 18-year-old boys, and they're doing so by coercion and conditioning the supply of food, of humanitarian aid that Israel is allowing to get into the Gaza Strip, that is paid for by many parts of the international community.
People.
And Hamas, you're interrupting me, and that's not okay. I didn't interrupt you.
Oh, I
and
will
Hamas
gladly
is
interrupt
using
a
that in order to. Of course you will. You can call me names, but that doesn't justify anything.
You are defending
And
genocide,
listen,
sir, and you belong in The Hague, not on a panel.
No, I belong in my free homeland, which is where I am and will continue to be. And you can continue to spew violence and hatred on Al Jazeera and promote terrorism, and you will be held accountable
Miriam,
for
here's
your
the thing.
deeds.
Miriam, if you're right, Miriam, that the time for that to happen will come, right?
Absolutely.
And if you're wrong, then you're actually slurring Jonathan in a way that I think is unfair for this particular panel now. You have no evidence that he supported any genocide.
Which is all you've been doing, Miriam. It's all about personal attacks, trying to paint me as something that I am, that I'm not, and you don't even have the facts straight.
Just to be clear, if everyone talks over each other, no one at home can ever understand anything anyone's saying.
So I'll just finish my point.
No.
Piers,
You don't all then just immediately start talking again. No,
then.
time out. I'm going to actually go to the one person who's been calm and reserved and respectful, and that's Batia. Batia, your response to what you've heard so far?
With all due respect to all the panelists, I disagree with Jonathan. I think this is a really good deal. I disagree with Ahmed. I do think that Hamas's capabilities have been severely degraded, and I think that they have never been this unpopular with the people of Gaza. You're seeing people speaking up against Hamas in a way that we really have not in a very long time. There were protests in 2019. They were brutally, brutally suppressed. So I really do think that this is a very ripe moment for something new to come out of this. And I think that's why, from our point of view as Americans, we elected Donald Trump because of the foreign policy that he promised, which was to be absolutely ruthless when it came to terrorism and absolutely dovish when it came to counterproductive wars that have nothing to do with us. When barbarians come into your homeland and steal your women and rape your women, you have to go and humiliate their soldiers and bring your women back.
I can't
and so I think that this is a very important moment, and it's showing us what we're going to see from the Trump
but where
administration
barbarians
in
enter
terms
your
of
homeland
a
and
new
rape your
foreign
women.
policy.
That is what they are.
That's what I'm looking forward to in the next
Is that really the
administration.
tenor of the conversation, Batia? Barbarians enter your homeland and rape your women?
Yeah,
Where
that
is
is
the
exactly
Okay, out of
what
interest,
they are.
Ahmed, okay.
Piers,
Hang on, please, everybody. Ahmed, I'm very curious.
With all due respect,
I'm very curious, Ahmed. If you don't call what happened on October the 7th barbaric, acts of atrocity committed by barbarians, what would you call it out of interest?
What do you call it?
No, I'm asking
within Israeli
Ahmed.
prison?
I'm not playing whataboutery. I'm asking about your indignation about the categorization of what happened on October the 7th as barbaric.
Come on, we didn't join Piers, the answer to your question, the reason I started speaking is because she called it barbaric. I didn't take issue with that use of, that's on her to use those adjectives. I took issue with the facts that are not accurate. She's claiming women were raped systematically or whatever. That is not true.
Women were raped.
Let me
Israel's own prosecutor says
let me just challenge you. Israeli authorities admitted last week that after 18 months of investigations, no allegations of rape or sexual assault have been
because
filed.
the victims were murdered, because the victims are dead, because the women were murdered as they were raped.
So why not allow an
you're not going
independent investigation?
to tell lies without any responses.
Constructive conversation.
There's no case to proceed because the women were murdered and butchered in cold blood. That's why there's no file.
Sexual assault hotlines found no evidence of such crimes. In fact, the reporter, Annette Schwartz, noted no one had met a victim of sexual assault. So despite this...
Because they were murdered. It's very convenient when you rape someone and then murder them.
The reason I am saying this...
Guys, you can repeat lies until you're blue in the face.
Let me just finish for 30 seconds. No.
You've been interrupting this entire conversation and filling it with nonsense and lies. You've been saying genocide and quoting all kinds of odd sources.
I am using
It's
facts.
utter and complete nonsense, and you've been cherry picking.
Jonathan, I'm not cherry picking. I am saying there is a recent
yes,
UN
you are. You are cherry picking with the capital C.
You know why you're interrupting me?
You know what? It's now becoming unwatchable again. Okay.
Because this is the
know
playbook.
What? I have read enough. I've read enough reports by people like Christina Lamb at the Sunday Times, one of the great reporters of the world, that it is beyond any doubt that women were sexually assaulted and raped. Right? And if you try and pretend they weren't, then I'm sorry, you're living in cloud cuckoo land. I want to bring in the Texas.
You're not a neutral adjudicator here.
I'm going to bring in. I'm sorry.
I'm really sorry.
When everyone talks, no one can hear you.
No.
I'm sorry. I am moderating the panel. I'm going to bring in the Texas Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw. Then I'll come back to the panel. When hopefully you will all have learned how to speak not over each other, but respectfully.
Yes, Daddy.
You know what? It's not about being yes, Daddy. It's about being respectful to a panel. Well, listen, if you're going to carry on, Miri, you may as well leave.
I will absolutely carry on.
It's honestly pathetic.
Me to come and I will say what I need to say.
Oh, it's honestly, it's childish. Don't be childish. Let me bring in Dan Crenshaw. Dan, thank you for waiting so patiently. Dan, with you, I wanted to talk specifically about the role of Donald Trump here, because he's president-elect. Obviously, inauguration coming on Monday. He sent his envoy, Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, last Friday met the Qatari Prime Minister to discuss the developments in the region. He then went to see Netanyahu. And after that talk, Netanyahu has obviously said the Prime Minister would send the director of Mossad, David Barnea, to Qatar's capital in order to try and advance this deal. It seems like Trump, through his Middle East envoy, acting in his behest, has achieved more in getting us to the place of a potential ceasefire and deal than Joe Biden's managed since October the 7th.
There's a couple of things happening here. And first, Piers, I promise not to call you Daddy. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'd appreciate that, Dan.
It'd be weird.
Very weird.
Look, there's obviously a Trump effect, and this is because of Trump's leadership and charisma. Of course, he has a big personality, but it's also because it is the incoming administration. This is, of course, who all of these players in the Middle East are going to want to talk to. So this is not surprising at all. There's another thing that we've seen over the last year, which is the Biden administration and the Democratic Party in general has always been caught between these two factions, this sort of pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel faction, and, they're largely a Jewish voting base, which supports Israel. So they've never really known what to do politically. Donald Trump doesn't have that problem. Republicans don't have that problem. We are for Israel. It's that simple. And that also makes deal making much more simple. So Biden would withhold weapons, right? Especially certain pieces of equipment, for instance, that would make dumb bombs, smart bombs. Didn't make a lot of sense. He would allow the United Nations to condemn Israel. It just wouldn't. It wasn't the amount of support that you would see under Donald Trump. So Hamas sees this, right? Hamas sees that they could probably continue the PR, the worldwide PR campaign against Israel that they have been successful in doing for decades and decades and decades under a Biden administration. But they see Trump here on the horizon, and Trump makes comments, of course, like there will be hell to pay if you don't return the hostages. Hamas believes him, and they should, because, look, we have 4 years of a Trump presidency where he really did do what he meant. I mean, he killed General Soleimani just because he was on a layover in Baghdad. He's that kind of president. And so you can expect that he's going to do what he says he's going to do, and it's going to push these people into a better deal. There's plenty of a debate over whether this is a good deal for Israel. I will say that's hard to say. You have to ask somebody who's from Israel. For America, what do we generally want strategically? Look, we want to weaken Iran. Well, Israel gave us that. We want to weaken Hezbollah. They really gave us that. We want a Syria that we can actually talk to. Well, that's happening right now. And we want to severely weaken Hamas. So for America's perspective, and I would say the last thing, what do we want? We want stability. We don't want chaos everywhere. That's good for America. If this deal gets us there, I would say that's a pretty good thing.
Are you concerned, Dan, about these reports coming out from American intelligence and from the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken? It seems like many of the killed Hamas fighters have been replaced with like for like. In other words, this idea that they've been killing and depleting most of Hamas may not actually be the reality on the ground, that they've just been replacing them as fast as they've been losing them.
It's possible. I need to really look into those reports and see what's real and what isn't. When you do replace fighters, you're not replacing those fighters with seasoned, trained fighters. You're replacing them with new fighters that need to be trained. So either way, Hamas has been decimated. And as I understand part of this deal, Hamas can never be the governing authority in Gaza ever again. Correct me if I'm wrong. I understand that to be part of the roadmap in this deal. So they can recruit as many fighters as they want, and then they'll be killed again by the Israeli Defense Forces, and presumably, possibly with American help, especially under a Trump presidency. So, look, neither of us, being Israel or the United States, have any interest in Hamas ever regaining any power. That's because that wouldn't be good for any of us, and it certainly wouldn't be good for the people of Gaza. That should be obvious to everyone by now. All Hamas has ever done is create conflict and misery for the people of Gaza. It's not like we don't have any sympathy for civilians in Gaza. I absolutely do. It's horrific. But the people who've created this war, it's very clear. It's Hamas. The people who want genocide is Hamas. It's in their charter. From river to the sea means genocide of the Jewish state. The Jews, the Israelis, are not committing genocide. That word gets thrown around all the time. Well, you're misusing it. It's not the correct definition. They've done more than any military in history to attempt to get civilians out of places where they are about to move in and conduct operations against Hamas. That is the opposite of genocide. War is messy, it's horrible, and there are casualties. And I wish there weren't. But when you have an atrocity like you do on October 7th, you have to question what choice you have. You have to eradicate the organization that conducted it.
Where do you see this in 2-3 years' time? I mean, how do you see the future of Gaza, for example? It's quite clear from their rhetoric. There are certain people on Netanyahu's cabinet, for example, who I think would be quite happy to never see Palestinians back in Gaza if they could possibly achieve that. I'm not saying all of them think that. I'm not even saying Netanyahu thinks that. But there are certainly people on that cabinet, I think, whose rhetoric suggests they would. Do you see a situation in 2-3 years' time of Gaza being rebuilt, a Hamas-free Gazan people being led by, I don't know, I mean, whether it's the Palestinian Authority or whether it's an Arab coalition or whoever it may be? How do you see the future here? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks incredibly complicated.
It is, and it's very hard to predict. Don't be a fool and try to predict what happens in the Middle East. You'll just end up being wrong. But we can say what we hope. And what we hope is that this roadmap, this peace plan, works out the way it says it's going to work out, which is Hamas is not the governing authority, an international coalition as an interim governing authority. In the end, the Palestinian people choose a governing authority of some sort in some form or fashion. Of course, that didn't turn out so well last time when they actually kicked out the Palestinian Authority, threw them off rooftops and elected Hamas so that they could be at war for the next 15 years. But that is still the hope. You're not going to get rid of millions of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Okay, that's not an option. Israel controlling it and governing it is not an option. It's not an option for Israel. They don't want to do that. Remember, they tried that before 2006. Then they tried letting it be autonomous, and look what they got. Thousands of rockets over their neighborhoods, and then October 7th. So, ideally, you get Hamas out of the picture. And you have a stronger presence, I think, from Arab countries, more aid coming in, more rebuilding, and then a governing authority that everyone can trust. That's the ideal situation. How you get there is very difficult.
Yeah. Dan Crenshaw, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
I mean, Miriam, I don't see any future in Gaza with Hamas in any kind of power. Do you?
Did we come up against the white man mantra of it's complicated? I think we did, folks. Here we are again.
Well, hang on, what colour are you?
Responding
hang on, what colour are you?
I'm sadly of your camp, Piers.
You're white. So why are you using
in November 2024,
well, you're sad you're white.
Sadly in your camp is what I said.
What does that mean?
What do you mean? With your life.
If you're going to toss around skin colour, Jives, what do you mean?
Yes. Anyway, your question was...
What do you mean?
In November 2024...
What do you mean by your
Yoav
skin
Gallant,
colour,
who
Jai?
was Israel's
Are you saying that because we have white
defense
skin, we
minister.
can't comment on this?
Oh, spare me. You know, this little victim thing you do...
It's not a victim
it's
thing.
Not
I'm
cute.
asking you to
It's
clarify
just exhausting.
exactly what you mean when you say these things.
And I will tell you exactly what I'm going to clarify, which is that in November 2024, Yoav Gallant, who is a wanted war criminal and Israel's ousted defense minister, actually told the families of hostages that Israel had actually achieved all its military objectives in Gaza. And he was very clear
But that's
on
not my
something
question
that
for
is
you.
well known
My
within
question for you
Israel.
is, should Hamas...
And that is
okay,
that
but my
the
question for you
hostages
is...
could
Sorry, you
have
have
been
to answer my
returned
question,
months
or I'll
ago.
move on to somebody else.
I'm still going to your question.
No, answer my
The
question.
current deal...
Should Hamas have any power going forward after this or not?
I'm a talk. Political objectives of this deal are not, unfortunately, peace, which is the only sort of deal that we should be discussing at this
Should
point.
Hamas have
We
any
are
power
talking
after
about
this?
a political... I'm not Palestinian. How is it for me to even answer that question? What I will tell you...
You seem
is
a
that
world
we
authority. A world authority on everything Israel's doing, but you can't even answer a basic question about whether Hamas should have any power after this.
Yes, sweetheart, I just do analysis.
I'm not your sweetheart.
You
I'm
are
not
on
your
this
daddy.
occasion.
I'm not any of these
You are
stupid
on this
little jibes
occasion.
you're doing.
We're
I am
still gonna
white,
do it.
a slur you seem to think is
As
somehow
I was saying
worth
to you,
delivering in the middle
the
of this.
current deal that we have on the table is really not a ceasefire deal, unfortunately, because there are no guarantees that phase 2 and 3 of the deal will ever be brought about. And I think that's really where the focus of this conversation should be.
You can't
What
answer
we
my
are
question
looking
about
at
Hamas having
is,
power.
Why don't we talk about serious things, Piers?
Why
I know
don't you
that's
just
not very
answer my
common
question?
for you.
I would actually say
I will
whether
answer
Hamas has
whatever I
power after
feel
this
the answer
is a
to
pretty
be.
damn serious question.
I will.
Do you think they should?
I will get to that.
Do you think they should?
I will get to
No,
that.
get to it now, because it's the question I've asked you.
I will get to it on my own time.
What's your answer?
My answer is, are you ready to hear it?
Answer it.
Little drum roll for you. Dum-dum-dum-dum. Is that we should be looking at a peace deal that achieves actual peace in the region.
Should
And
Hamas have any
unfortunately,
power?
At the moment, the current phased proposal
Sorry,
does not allow
one
us
more
to get
time
to that
before I
result.
leave you. Should Hamas have
Oh,
any
you're
power?
going to leave me? Oh, that would be sad. Let's actually talk about
Well, I wouldn't worry about
serious
it because you'll
things,
never be back
shall
here
we?
again. But just for the
How
purposes of the question,
unfortunate, Piers. You think
for the purposes of the
people wanna
question,
be
we're not
on
all
this show?
5-year-olds.
We're
Why don't you
only
just try and be
here
an
to try
adult?
and actually get
Try
some
and be an
facts on the
adult in the
table.
room and answer a straight question.
How about you don't talk over me?
No,
I'll
how
let
about you answer my
one.
question or you shut up?
Oh, did
Which
you
one's it going to
actually
be?
just tell me to shut up on
Yes,
the show?
I did.
You're
No, I gave you a choice.
actually as
Answer the
much of an
question
asshole as
or
people
shut
said
up.
you
One of
were.
the two. Which one's it going to be?
You're not my dad, sweetheart.
Which one's it going to be?
You're not going to tell me what to do.
Okay.
And I'm going to
Ahmed,
tell
let me
you
go to you because you
what
seem
the real question
like somebody who
should
won't be calling me sweetheart or dad. No, I'm done with you. I'm sorry. I'm done with you, Miriam. You're a complete. You're a complete. I do actually on my own show. I do on my show. You're a complete
Have a
and
little
utter
tantrum about
half-wit. So let me bring in Ahmed.
Of
Ahmed,
course, yes.
should Hamas have any power at the end of all this or not?
Whether they should or shouldn't, Piers, it looks likely that they will, as we've heard from all the guests on this panel, essentially. That seems to be what Batya seemed to disagree with me on, even though I was just citing U.S. intelligence and Israeli officials. I do want to just say one thing is clear. I want to correct the record on two things, and I'm not going to take us back, Piers. But, you know, it's in the Likud charter, and it was part of their 1977 election manifesto, this phrase, from the river to the sea. I think it's important that I bring it up because your previous guest said that it was in the Hamas charter. Of course, Hamas has only been around, you know, for 20-some years. The double standards that this speaks to and how narratives around the phrase from the river to the sea are treated, not just by the media, reveals the power dynamics at play here. When Palestinians like myself say it, use it, I have it on a sweater, on a jacket, we're calling for liberation. We're calling for a demand for freedom from decades of displacement and apartheid. Yet, of course, it's twisted into a genocidal threat. Meanwhile, Israeli leaders like Netanyahu, who I think is best described as a war criminal, who has an arrest warrant issued against him, he openly uses it. He claims the same geography, expanding settlements, enforcing policies that erase Palestinians. An entire family was erased today, 11 of them, where they were displaced in Deir el-Balah. And, you know, Piers, the one thing I want to say, I know we disagree on the rape thing, but I do want to say, the reason I interrupted Batya, not only because I was quite shocked to see someone from Newsweek use this sort of terminology and adjectives and language so loosely, but while the media and Batya fixate on these debunked and discredited narratives, let me just get through my sentence, it's largely ignored documented, verified cases of sexual violence committed by Israeli soldiers against Palestinian detainees, including video evidence. A recent UN report details systematic rape, torture, dehumanizing acts that were inflicted even against children. And that is Josh Paul, the former State Department that resigned, who says that. That is not me.
Okay, so I want to bring, we're running out of time. I need to bring in the others. I want to bring in Batia to respond, because Batia, you haven't had much chance to speak before you interrupted. I mean, Batia, how do you see the future here? Because it seems to me that it's horrendously complicated. Nobody has a clear idea of what's going to happen. What do you think is the smart way to resolve all this coming out of the war?
So first of all, just in the spirit of unity, I want to agree with something Ahmed said. Israel does have more power, and that's a good thing. There's this sort of worship of abjection and weakness on the left that leads often to the creation of false equivalences. And I think the first thing you're going to see from the Trump administration's foreign policy is abandoning this need for allies to be weak and equivocation in foreign policy. Trump likes his allies to be strong, and that's what we saw with this deal. When Steve Witkoff went to Doha and to Qatar and then brought Bibi Netanyahu to the table and said, look, this is happening. This is very classic in terms of the kinds of foreign policy we're going to see going forward. What I want to see is safety and security for Israel and self-determination for the Palestinian people. I think probably all of us on this panel want that very, very deeply. And yeah, maybe it is Pollyannish to be seeing this huge uproar from Gazans against Hamas for the first time in so long. But I think that we should be empowering civil society within Gaza. We should be calling upon moderate Arab countries to step up and play a leadership role so that those voices don't get crushed by, I'm sorry, yes, the barbarians in Hamas, but that
really
civil society has a chance
sorry,
to
Miriam, you had
live
your chance.
so that everybody
Sorry,
can
Miriam,
have
you had your chance.
self-determination
Sorry, you don't
and
talk
freedom
over her.
in that land.
You don't talk over her. Sorry, you don't talk over her. Please be quiet and let Batia finish. Batia, please finish your point.
It's so dehumanizing for you to use that word.
I finished. Thank you.
I would like Batia to finish her point, please. Stop talking, please.
I'm honestly shocked that people would object to calling Hamas barbarians. Of all the things I said here, I didn't expect that to be controversial.
No, I took issue with the rape, which was not controversial.
Well, they definitely raped and sexually abused women.
Right.
But the point is, where is the accountability of the extremists?
No, sorry, Miriam, you had your chance. Let me bring in Jonathan.
In power
We bring in Jonathan.
who are the real key that
Jonathan, here's my question for you.